I think they're watching us very carefully, and they are adapting as they need to, because we're not the same society that we were in 1947.
What does that say to you then about the nature of this whole phenomenon?
They appear to be engaged in monitoring. They appear to be engaged in approaching for a certain period of time. They engage in what I've come to call data denial. So this is not disclosure. What we are seeing, I believe, is the result of a kind of tug of war going on behind the scenes. I just do not think, based on any behavior that I've ever seen in this phenomenon, that they have the slightest desire to actually communicate with us in an open way. They have total command of every situation that they seem to be engaging in.
Joining me on the podcast once again is author, historian, lecturer, and all-round wonderful chap to listen to speak about the UFO topic, and as many of you could, like myself, we could listen to it all day, and we've got him here for a short amount of time. Welcome back, Richard Dolan.
Hi, Andy. It is always a pleasure to be back here with you, and thanks for inviting me again.
Yeah, no, great to speak to you about all the stuff I have coming up, Richard. Not least of all, for those who can see the podcast, Volume 2 of your book, History of USOs, is finally out. And shout out to Alan Levine, who illustrated this one too. Some wonderful illustrations. And we're going to get to illustrations and how they can be so important when we speak about Drop 3 of the UFO files and the release. And we're going to get to your book during the course of the podcast too. But Richard, with so much to speak about, I was telling you before recording, I had around about 300 questions sent over for you via Patreon, via email, via YouTube, contact form. Those have been built in as much as I can to the body of the interview. We'll get through what we can. So folks, thank you so much for sending over your questions. And I've tried to group them into various sections just so we can get as much out of Richard as possible before he drops dead from exhaustion, and going through all of those. And it's at a bit of an exhausting time, I think, for a lot of folks involved in the UFO topic, Richard. Before we even start getting into particulars, middle of June 2026, how are you feeling with the topic in general?
The topic of UAP or UFOs, there's a couple of ways to answer that. So on a personal level, I am as fascinated by it as I've ever been in my entire life. I've been studying this now since I was in my early 30s, in the early 1990s. And I'm now in my, I'll say, mid 60s, and I've not lost any interest at all. My interests have evolved. So I love studying case history still, but I'm really interested in understanding, let's call it, alien behavior. As particularly as we can kind of understand it through the behavior of the craft, not even the behavior of the beings that people encounter, although that's interesting too, but just doing kind of behavioral analysis of the craft and what they appear to be doing. I'm just absolutely fascinated by that. But the entire subject still interests me. Now, to look at it in another way, let's say the broader community evolution of this, how the subject is being treated, I'm much less happy. I'll just say, I think we have a kind of disclosure mania that, I support a total, complete, honest UFO disclosure. I always have. But I'll just give you a perfect example. You and I, just before we recorded, we were discussing the third White House tranche release of UAP files, and my observation, just looking around at the community, like everyone was just bitching and moaning about it. It's like, this isn't disclosure, this isn't an alien, this is bullshit, this is horrible, it's a waste of time. And I guess why? Because there was no alien handed to people on a golden platter. But if you just looked at the release of files, I thought, this is absolutely fascinating. I was totally into it. There was one PDF after another that many of which I'd known about. There's Project Blue Book Special Report number 14 was in this tranche. And that's been out for many years, but I will bet you that most people have never read that report. And it's a damn good thing to read. And there was lots and lots of other fascinating old Army intelligence documents from the 1940s that proved that these guys were not only taking the subject of flying saucers seriously, but they were talking about when is the next wave going to occur. Like, they're actually getting into this. And I just think if you just take disclosure out of the equation for a moment and just look at the data as it was being released, it's absolutely fascinating. But we're at such a point in our society that we're so fractured, so fragmented, and no one believes anything. And then there's a large number of people out there who I really think their attitude is anything related to UFOs is a psyop, must not be believed, which I think is a very destructive attitude as well, because I believe in the reality of UAP or UFOs. And therefore, I do believe that there are genuine sightings that are, absolutely legit and anomalous. So I just see like the what we once called the community has just gone into every different direction imaginable. And that makes me think, how the hell is disclosure ever supposed to happen? I co-authored a book on this 16 years ago. It felt like in a different universe. But even in 2010, the writing was on the wall. But we maintained the assumption, wrong assumption, turns out, that when disclosure would happen, there would be kind of a unified public response. Like the American president would make an announcement and the world would listen with bated breath. And that world doesn't exist anymore. That does not exist. And so, I just think this attitude that many people have about disclosure, another attitude being that disclosure will somehow make us better, make us a better society. I used to think that. So I've been guilty of that, but I don't really think much is going to make us better as a society. We're going on a totally different path. And disclosure, I think, is a great idea, and it could mitigate some bad things that are happening in our world to some extent, but it's not really going to. I don't really think there's a game changer in this any longer. So I've evolved into a different perspective on this, perhaps.
And I'll unpack that as we go through some of these questions, because especially on the documents, I am one of those who I'm not changed my opinion on the drop 3 and the quality of it. I think, and we'll talk about that now, okay? I think that's a good place to start. So War.gov /UFO has now had 3 drops of UFO files, videos, and attachments. Beginning early May to mid-June, there was a 2-week gap, then a 3-week gap. And we've got releases 1, 2, and 3. Overall, what's your thoughts been very quickly on the 3 drops of files? Because you've been on, I think, just after the first one dropped, and then we've got the third one now.
Well, there's no single smoking gun in any of them. Like, there's no disclosure documents that are hiding in there that will like prove that the U.S. government is engaged in a cover-up, for example. But what you do have is a very, very large collection of historical and contemporary records from a variety of agencies. FBI, CIA, some of the military organizations that show a consistent pattern of interest in the phenomenon by those agencies. In the very last tranche, for example, there was an extended discussion of this orb activity going on in the American West that actually took up a number of FBI files and was subject to, and I think it was an FBI reconstruction, an artist reconstruction in numerous formats, including some video format reconstructions of something that really did seem quite fascinating and difficult to explain conventionally. And the very fact that someone in the FBI went through the trouble to recreate these with a what I thought was a pretty good artist's recreation. I thought, wow, that was just from 2022, I believe, or even more recent than that. So there were some things in there. They didn't have a conclusion that this is definitely alien, but it's pretty good stuff. I thought it was pretty interesting information, and for my part, I was glad to see it come out. So I think what you're seeing, all of these tranches, this is not disclosure. I've been saying probably the same thing that you might have been saying, which is that if the U.S. government really wanted to do disclosure, that would physically not be hard. You could have a general with an iPhone going into a hangar and just recording, this is the craft we got in 1953. This is the craft we got in this year. Oh, and here's our resident alien being, say hello to the camera. Like, that could have been done in theory, and that's not been done. And what do we get instead? We get these document releases, some of which are totally boring, it's true, and others which seem boring but are interesting historically and so forth. But so this is not disclosure. What we are seeing, I believe, is the result of a kind of tug of war going on behind the scenes. This has been a battle that has been going on for a good decade, or even more, really, where you have a genuine, I keep calling them an insurgency. I can't think of a better phrase. There are people who are insiders. They are establishment, intel, military people. They're insiders, but they believe in some level of transparency and disclosure. This is not a new thing. You could go back to the 1950s, read some of the old books by like the American author Donald Kehoe. He was a retired Marine Corps major who had a lot of friends in the military and in the Pentagon in the 50s and 60s. And they would say the same thing to him. It's like, the secrecy on this is wrong, or at least it's excessive, and we need to get some of this information out. That there's always been that. And so I think what we're seeing in the last decade, with a lot of help from the culture of the web, which did not exist in prior decades, is that some of these people have been able to get some documents released, some videos out, and they're kind of stirring the pot a little bit. But at the same time, we are still seeing a tremendous amount of resistance on the other side of that bureaucracy that has no interest in a genuine disclosure of any sort, because it's way too disruptive. And that's what you're looking at. So the problem is that the side that's on defense, that is the secrecy group, realizes that they have to give up some things, some information, because there's just too much attention being focused on this, and there's too much congressional pressure, and so they were forced into creating, the Arrow office and these other aspects within the military that are, at least in theory, amenable to looking into UAP. So that's them making a concession. This is a battle that is going on behind the scenes, and we, the public, get to see some of the results. And one of those results is the series of White House releases of UFO UAP data. I think that's really what we're looking at. This is not, it's not the same thing as disclosure. It's a I would say it's a process that is being pushed by still a small group within DC and connected areas that want to see some of this information out. And they still have a long road ahead of them. This is not an easy thing. We're not dealing with a unified United States government. That does not exist. It's too large to be unified. You've got factions and more factions and yet more. So I think this is what we're seeing play out.
I can accept that we're seeing the fallout then, because I think you've put that well, of an internal struggle that's been going on for a long time, well before this administration and administrations before it. And we're just at a point where perhaps some of the secrecy keepers, like you say, are having to give up something. I think the issue I've got here, though, is who is this for? Because I think you've got that UFO community we've talked about so many times, which itself is fractured too, who some of them think this is for them, which it's not. This is, no one's dropping documents for Richard Dolan to go look at. You personally, you've even said some of these cases you've seen, especially Release 1. There were so many documents that were newspaper clippings and correspondence from members of the public and things like that. So, yeah. So who is it actually for? Because this was, I think for me, an opportunity for the general public to not to see disclosure, but get a glimpse at what's really happening and what's going on. Is it unfair to say that's not happening and maybe they are getting a glimpse into it? But I think, just to your point, if this happened in 2010, 1990, 1970, I think you get, and including today, 4 very different reactions to those societies. I think with the way we have evolved or devolved, depending how you want to look at it as a society, especially in the West, with the internet, with social media, with so many things regressing. We talked about before about people not reading. So right now,
Yeah.
people want to see videos and will look at videos, and I'm as guilty as that of most, because they'll scroll through an Instagram feed or a TikTok reel or an X reel, and they'll want to see videos. And Joe Murgia, who often posts on X, will put huge, well researched or well thought out chunks of prose, and he'll say people don't read it. I'm like, no, because people
Yeah.
go, oh, that's far too long, didn't read, show me the video, show me the clip. And that's sort of where we're at as a society. So almost
Yeah.
like they're dumping this stuff. They're not doing it for Richard Dolan. They're not doing it for Andy McGrillen. You know, the documents are almost, God, I don't want to say unnecessary, but they're a byproduct of these releases. And it's the videos that are always going to get the general public's focus.
Mhm.
So as someone who wants the general public, and as you do as well, to see this topic for what it really is, the secrecy, the cover up, the lack of transparency, the BS we've put up with for decades, they're seeing videos like in this third drop, those recreations, which in a way you said are useful, but also people look at those and at such a surface level and go, what the hell is this? That's not a real video. And they're gone past it. So it has almost a negative effect as each drops come along. That's the way I feel anyway.
Yeah. I take your point. I would just say a couple of things. One, the government, you ask who are they doing this for? And it's true, they're not doing it for you or for me or for anyone listening. They're doing it to cover their ass. Government is doing this to follow the CYA rule because the government has been essentially pressured into a place where the public is asking about this more and more. And so the Pentagon and right up to the White House, because Donald Trump himself talked about, the need to release these files as a way to placate the public and give the appearance that they are following through from a public demand. And that, I think, is the only thing that they're really doing here. And they're releasing these files, which, as you rightly point out, people, like the last release is probably 80-90% were PDF files that people had to read. And people did not like that. They don't like to read a 1949 U.S. Army report that talks about this. The unfortunate part of all of this is that when you go through those documents, if someone has the patience to go through those documents, you find a tremendous amount, a powerful argument to be made for the fact that the U.S. government's taken flying saucers and UFOs seriously. Like, it's right in there. And so that's quite significant. It's quite significant to see that. Now, that's something that I, in my work, have been focused on for more than 30 years. I've tried to make the case in really most of my books that whatever you think about the reality of UFOs or UAP, it is a fact that the United States government and military and national security community have been deeply, deeply interested in this all the while they've been saying that there's nothing to it and that there's a discrepancy there. And to me, that's the core argument that I have tried to make in my entire career. There's a lot more that could be said. And I think that the release of these files completely 100% supports that position. And that's not a trivial point to make. It doesn't answer the question, what are we dealing with? Who are these people, these beings? What does the government, U.S. or other, actually know? Those questions are not being answered. And it's true, people want the answers to it. And that's just not likely to happen. I think we have this, it's because we talk about disclosure so often in our community, we make this assumption that, well, the government's just going to have to disclose what they know. And we don't live in that world. We don't live in a genuinely, we like to think we live in some kind of quasi-democratic society, but we don't live in that. We live in a technocracy that goes through the motions and the whole game of pretend. Like, let's pretend we have a democracy. Let's pretend we're actually electing these people when we know the whole thing is stage managed from behind. And it's been that way for a long, long time. So we have a highly managed pseudo-democratic system, you could say. And that's not going to be responsive disclosure. I mean, if we lived in an openly fascist or an openly totalitarian communist society, would we expect government disclosure then? Probably we would not, but we expect it here. When in fact, what we have, whether you're in the UK, I'm in the US, really doesn't matter, man. We both live in a highly, tightly controlled system, each of us. And I'm sure the people watching, wherever they are, they're like, yep, that's my society too. So I'm not saying like we should give up all hope for this, but I do think, we want to have a little sense of realism of what we're actually dealing with. And the thing is, when societies lose all sense of realism, that's when they get angrier and angrier. You look at the wars going on in the world today, whether it's the US with Iran or Europe against Russia, because it's not just Ukraine against, really Europe against Russia. Why are they angry? They're angry because they think they have omnipotent, omniscient power, like the West is running the world like it did in the early 1990s. And so when things don't go the way that the West wants, they get very angry. But it really comes down to the fact that there's no sense of realism. You got American neocons that are angry that the West is caving into Iran, as if the West had any power over Iran to begin with. I would argue that power was not there. As if Europe has any power over Russia. Europe has no power over Russia. But yet these nations and groups act like that their word is the final word. They have all this power, and they don't. It's a lack of realism. It's a lack of realism in the world, and it's a lack of realism in the UFO UAP community. We think that we have a lot more power than we actually have, and so when things don't go the way we want, everyone gets angry. Everyone's angry.
Being Scottish, I can appreciate the angriness because I am perpetually always angry, and that's how I live my life. And underlying,
I would love to talk about Scottish politics with you sometime. I follow it from afar. I'm quite interested in what's going on up there.
Do you know, very briefly, I'll segue. I know very little about UK-based politics, right? Because it's so boring. I know a lot more about US politics, but obviously I don't always like to comment because I'm not from the US. But just yesterday, Keir Starmer announced that from 2027, under 16s will be banned from using social media in the UK, and it has not been met with a positive reaction, because largely people can see this as the step towards IDs being introduced to be online and all of that stuff. But Keir Starmer's just Jesus, like
that dude is a joke. Like, he is terrible. Probably possibly the worst. I mean, it's hard to say because the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, man, you guys have had a lot of prime ministers and they've all sucked. I'm just sorry to say.
I always go with the old, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always gets in, and they just shaft you in a different way. So pick your naughty calendar with position of the month, and that's the way you'll be.
But here in the US, we jump out of the frying pan and into the fire. So we have a very much a rigged game. You look at a guy like Trump, who people love Trump, people hate Trump. I'm not looking at it that way. I've never really looked at him from an emotional perspective. I don't get emotional when I think about Donald Trump, like many people do. But I would say he was a guy who positioned himself as the ultimate outsider. And in fact, he was accepted as the outsider. He, like the Republican Party back in 2015, saw him as a threat and as an outsider, and they tried to take him down. The Democratic Party saw him as a threat as well, and they tried to take him down. So whether he was or wasn't an outsider, he certainly talked like one and he was perceived like one. But what's happened? I would argue that the system has basically swallowed him up. He was going to drain the swamp. Maybe he believed some of the things he said. I think he probably did and does. But belief and ability, two different things. And that system has swallowed him up. And if it can swallow him up, who's it not going to swallow up?
Well,
a cantankerous, arrogant, narcissistic billionaire. If it takes him, it's going to probably take everyone.
Well, I'm going to take us back to 1948. Take us back to simpler times. In some ways, on your review of Drop 3, because I hate that word tranche and everyone keeps using it. Hard to say. You talked about a file, DOW UAP D086. For those of you following along with the buzzword bingo, rolls off the tongue. And I'm bringing this up because I did read, after being prompted to go and look at some stuff.
Which one is that?
So
I
this is the file that you talked about, where it was from the Commandant of the 5th Naval District to activities indicated in distribution list, subject flying discs, and it's essentially a report about patterns and new appearances of flying saucers, right? And for those who hadn't seen it, and I do recommend checking it, Richard, I'm going to read you very briefly some of the stuff here, okay? So from the Chief of Naval Operations, they said, subject flying discs, report of. Number 1, the Director of Intelligence, US Air Forces, has informed the Navy Department that a cycle of reappearance of flying discs is becoming apparent. Now, that language is interesting, and that the beginning of a new interval is imminent. There's that word, imminent. They have requested that any such sightings be reported as quickly as possible and these phenomena be investigated. It's also requested, therefore, all stations be directed to report to the nearest Air Force command. But just that first bit, Richard, around informed the Navy that a cycle of reappearance of flying discs is becoming apparent and that the beginning of a new interval is imminent. Now, that was interesting. That was pointed out to me before I'd watched your review, to go and have a look at that. And even if you look at one of the other files, DOW UAP D088, there's an older file that gets into pattern hunting, and it's actually a civilian correspondence, and it links strange reports to moon positions, cycles from Venus. And bear in mind, we're going back here to the early 1900s, folks. Earlier airships or saucer-style reports. But again, it's speculation, not an Air Force conclusion, but they are receiving reports on this and looking at it. This idea of patterns and cycles, I think, is a really, really interesting one. And I'd love to get your take on this, because I've got some questions for you around how this potentially changes how we should look at the entire subject of ufology, if indeed there is a cycle and pattern to these things.
Yeah, I'm very glad you brought this up, because it struck me as quite significant as well. The very fact that by the late 1940s, this is early days, that you have analysts within, and I didn't research, I didn't catch this, by the way, 30 plus years ago when I was researching this period for the first time. I was going through some Freedom of Information documents and some research, but I didn't know about this particular file. But what you see is that you had very serious military intelligence analysts seeing, as you just noticed, patterns in flying saucer reports and in waves of flying saucers. So that tells us this was absolutely seen as a national security concern, these flying discs, despite the fact that even by the late 40s, they were already being dismissed, by the establishment as ridiculous nonsense and juvenile, foolishness. But they were taking it very seriously and looking for patterns. And we, by the way, those documents don't tell us what those patterns are. So we don't really get that. But looking at the early history of these sightings, as I have studied them, you get waves of sightings that happen periodically during the late 40s and into the early 1950s that were quite notable, and sometimes were commented on by other officials. In some of the early books that you could read, there's Captain Edward Ruppelt back in the 50s wrote a very, very fine book on this, and he noted that in 1952, a senior, he never really identified who this person was, but a senior person said, "Yep, we're expecting another wave of sightings." This is 1952. That did indeed occur shortly thereafter. So I just think this release of documents, I just think, if we are willing, as you just did, to look into the deeper meaning of what these documents are saying, you can find it shows a very, very significant national security response to this phenomenon. And that alone ought to cause us to ask questions like, why was the United States government so interested in this in the late 1940s when they were pretending otherwise? Why? And the answer is staring you right in the face. Is because these objects, which were did not come from Russia. And there, by the way, there are studies in this last release that refer to whether or not, could these be from a foreign power? And there is no conclusion, whether in this release or in any release, there's no conclusion in the early years that indicated this was a Soviet project, that the Russians were creating flying saucers and flying them over U.S. territory and sensitive bases. So my point is, you had people looking at that. They were coming up empty. They were still having these reports of mechanical, physical objects in sensitive airspace, and they couldn't figure out who was behind it. And again, within the national security intelligence community, people were coming to the conclusion that this is probably extraterrestrial, because what else could it be? It's not one of our secret projects that we can identify. It doesn't appear to be a Soviet project. Who else is going to be doing this in the late 1940s? The answer is no one. There's no other nation that would be in a position to do this.
So I wonder, am I interpreting this wrong? Or the way I read that is that they almost can predict or know when these things are going to have a wave or a flap, and can almost say, yeah, we're due a wave, it might last a few months. How would they even get to know that these things are about to start appearing? Is that something then that is repeatable? I wonder what that says about cycles of behaviors around through the
I don't think
decades.
you misinterpreted it. I think you interpreted that correctly. It does read like that the analysts who were going over this thought, yeah, we're probably in for another cycle, but they don't explain why. That's the frustrating part of that document.
What does that say to you then about the nature of this whole phenomenon? That it's not, we're going to have this random bunch of sightings, civilian, Navy, all that kind of stuff, that one particular aspect of it is almost mathematically or scientifically repeatable. You can see a pattern. It's a response. And like, for example, abductions, a lot of folks would say, especially in recent years, the abduction phenomena has slowed down. You don't hear that much about abductions anymore. It doesn't really happen that often. And there perhaps was a concentrated period of time, perhaps over a few decades, 60s to 90s, where abductions seemed more rife and more thoroughly reported. If that's the case, do these cycles perhaps coincide with a plan that this phenomenon, if it's observational, this is something I talked about on, I think it was the Doomer Friday show with the night shift crew last week. Would it say then that these are observing a pattern of observation, a pattern of interaction, a pattern of study where they abduct and check us out, and that perhaps these things are being ticked off and they have observed, they have interacted, they have had their close encounter experiences, they've abducted and studied us to the point where maybe in the late 90s or early 2000s, whatever it was they were looking at, they went, we know enough. Whether it was food chain, genetics, whatever it was. And now we're in this new period of whatever that may be. Is it a final stage of whatever it is they're looking to do? Is it a case we have a phenomenon that comes along, checks us out, and moves on because maybe it's a scientific study? Or is it something more?
Yeah.
Probably asking you a ton of different, questions or hypotheses there, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I think you're moving into a very interesting theory that I probably agree with, which is simply that it's possible that, and it would make sense that any visiting intelligence, if let's say they just arrived in large numbers in the 1940s. I know many people argue, well, they whoever they happen to be, they've been here forever. Well, I don't know who the they is that's been here forever. I do know that the quantity of genuine and good sightings has gone, to orders of magnitude greater since the 1940s. That's undeniable to me. There's some good sightings prior to that, but it really just goes crazy during and after the World War II period. So it would imply that, let's say there's an intelligence that recently arrived, that they're going through a series of protocols and processes that might have included abductions at certain periods. And now, as you say, maybe they're done with that and they're moving on to different protocols. That's not impossible. However, I would say this. The reason when people say abductions aren't happening more, I'm dubious about that. I don't really know if I believe that. abductions could well have been happening in large amounts back in the 1940s and 50s, but no one was paying attention. No one was studying it. We went through a period where there were several researchers who really threw themselves into the abduction phenomenon. Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and John Mack. Those were the big three. They wrote books. They wrote very good books that were great reading, and the subject got a lot of attention. There's, other abduction researchers who also write some books, but they haven't really gotten anywhere near the same amount of attention. People like Yvonne Smith, Kathleen Martin, they do very fine work on abductions in many ways. They're just not getting the attention. But more than that, I don't know if there are any contemporary abduction researchers who are really working the field at all. Every now and then I encounter people who describe to me what surely seems like abduction experiences that happened in the 21st century. So I don't think the phenomenon has stopped. I think that we're just not paying as much attention to it. That's what I suspect. But I don't deny the likelihood of alien adaptive behavior. In fact, I think that they are highly adaptive to the changes in our society. I think they're watching us very carefully, and they are adapting as they need to, because we're not the same society that we were in 1947, not even close. So their behavior has to go through modifications as well, if they want to preserve their own, leeway and their own field of action, which I have no doubt they do. So they would be adaptive to us. But we really are working off of a very limited amount of information, frankly. We're not. We'll talk about my USO study a little later, but I collected close to 700 USO, that is water-based accounts that are, they're fascinating. But I have no doubt there are multiple times that number that I was not able to obtain, that I wasn't able to find. So I don't really know if my data sample is truly reflective of the full gamut of this. I have what I have. It's limited, and I worked hard to get a large data sample, and there's still so much I haven't gotten. So when you have very few people really doing the work of abduction research, well, then you're not going to get much. You're not going to get much data about this. But I would be very hesitant to say, oh, well, people aren't getting abducted anymore. There's just too many sightings. If you go into the public databases, I'm a big fan of the National UFO Reporting Network, run out of the state of Washington, the West Coast of the U.S. And they'll put out, between 5,000 and 8,000 sightings a year. And a lot of them are someone will wake up at 2 a.m. to go outside, and they'll see a dark triangle or a dark object hovering over their neighbor's house at 100 meters altitude. And so if that's the case, I have to ask, what's that object doing? What's it doing hanging out over someone's home at 2:30 a.m? Well, maybe that's some kind of interaction that's going on. There's a lot of those types of sightings that take place. So I would be very hesitant to argue that there are, abductions aren't happening. What I would say is that abduction researchers are definitely not garnering the attention that they used to, and maybe there aren't as many of them. That's possible.
I think it says to me potentially a few things. One, that the idea of, when if you get your kids a puppy, and you've got the adult on the couch and you have the puppy out who's this little innocent, thing, and you have a kid of quite a young age, and as the adult, you have to watch the kid, make sure they're treating the puppy okay. The kid might be a little bit rough, pick it up, play with it in a way you wouldn't. Have we got this phenomenon that's been here potentially for a long time? Maybe moved on, comes back, whatever, but almost they're watching. And then you have other phenomena that come along, which are more like the kids who, for a shorter time, want to play with us, the puppy. They want to give us attention. They want to prod it, poke it, check it out. It's a new thing. It's fun. It's fluffy. How does it work? It's different to us. And then maybe the ones in the background stop it now and again and go, that's enough. maybe the kids just get bored and move on from the puppy, but you've still got the parents in the background kind of watching?
Well, I don't really see a lot of reports that give me the idea that these beings are joyriding or having fun or, screwing around at humanity's expense. I don't really see any of that behavior. What I interpret, I see behavior of objects that are very elusive, that appear to engage in the following types of activities. They appear to be engaged in monitoring. They appear to be engaged in approaching for a certain period of time. They engage in what I've come to call data denial. That is, they have a very excellent ability to disable a lot of our electronics and communications equipment when they want to, or our recording equipment. So they deny us the opportunity to collect data on them while they are presumably collecting data on us. They will approach military assets with regularity, whether American, whether UK, whether Russian, whether Chinese. They approach those military assets. They appear to be extracting data from them. That's what it looks like to me. And then they're gone. Then they're gone. So there's not a great desire that I note from these craft that they're in any way interested in having a relationship with us based on equality. I don't get that at all. I get that they are interested in doing what they want to do. They have total command of every situation that they seem to be engaging in. They don't seem to be at a loss. They don't seem to have like these screw ups. I don't see that. If they do, it's not really quite evident to me. So I think they're watching us. Maybe they're calibrating themselves against us. Like what new weapon do these humans have now? And they come and they check that out and maybe decide how do we deal with that if we need to. That's totally possible. But they're not. I don't get the sense personally that they're like there's a group of teenage aliens out there that have to be restrained by mom and dad every so often. Not impossible. It wouldn't be impossible that you'd have rogue elements, I suppose. But I don't really see evidence of that in my observation of it. What I see is very, very controlled, very I was going to say rational, but maybe I should say very, very controlled. I think they're very controlled, and they seem to know exactly what they do, and they seem to have no fear of us. They don't seem to be. They don't. I don't think they want to interact with us. I think we're probably. Why would they want to? Actually, what a hassle it would be. I mean, this is a good place to talk about this difference between disclosure and contact. I just do not think, based on any behavior that I've ever seen in this phenomenon, that they have the slightest desire to actually communicate with us in an open way. And how could that be done in a way that wouldn't rip our society apart? I think it would not be possible. I think human society, like who would the aliens talk to? They'd talk to Donald Trump. They would talk to Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the United Nations. Whoever they talk to, there's going to be an entire group of people that'll be like, what about us? Why that person? Any message, I believe, that they would have for us would almost certainly be weaponized by all the different factions in our society.
Is this based on one? Is this, sorry, Richard, is this based on one group of entities, though? Because
right.
That would then be that every group of entities feels the same way, that they don't want to interact. Is that then that, I hate the phrase prime directive and all that kind of Star Trek talk, but is it then that they're told or they decide they're not ready for it? Because surely if we've got multiple species interacting, at least one of them would be more interested in, let's have more of a relationship, let's get involved. Or is it that then more of a communication across the board to be like, let's not, they're not ready?
I'll just say, if there's one rule that I hope exists, it would be the prime directive, because it should exist. I don't know if it does. In other words, think about what a horrible thing it would be to do to a developing society, like let's say early humans. They're just figuring out cause and effect. They're just figuring out, wow, I can manipulate this environment and I can do things. And then you show up. And then you show up. You're an alien and you're like, well, let's explain to you how things are. Like, you would completely, I mean, what a violation. I mean, it's honestly, it's one of the most egregious, intimate violations of the development of a brittle, fragile species that is just discovering reason and causality, and then you're going to go in there, and they're going to look at you as gods, and you're just going to screw with them. So now here we are in the 21st century, but we think, oh, well, we're so much more sophisticated and we're so much more advanced. Really? So we think we're on the level of beings that can probably manipulate space and time in a way that we can't even begin to imagine. Beings that probably understand causality in vastly greater ways than we can probably imagine. But we think that we can rock on their level. We can roll with them. We really think very highly of ourselves. We think that we have this psychological stability, that our society would be able to sit in a room with a being that probably has a relative IQ of, let's say, 500, and can read all the things in your mind that you don't even want yourself to know about, much less other people. Like, it could very likely be a highly intimidating prospect to deal with these other beings.
Is it the equivalent of, you get these tribes and indigenous folks in jungles around the world and forests, and now and again a missionary will approach one of these people who have never seen civilization like we have, and they end up getting shot with some kind of poisonous dart because they've tried to infiltrate a society that is just not ready for that kind of outside interaction. Whereas, though, let's be fair, if that missionary went in with a machine gun, they could literally mow them all down if they wanted, because there's only so much that primitive weapons can do against that kind of force. And that's what we're kind of dealing with, where these beings have just went, let's stay at a distance, let's do what we're doing. These folks are just not ready, because we are literally at the equivalence of bows and arrows and that really basic learning and thinking still, compared to these intelligences, whatever they may or may not be.
We have nuclear bows and arrows. We have artificially intelligent bows and arrows. So we have serious capabilities now. But imagine you're them again. So why would you come here to begin with? I see two reasons. Reason number one is Earth itself, and I'm always bemused when I hear people say, "Well, our planet's nothing special. It's probably one of billions of planets like this." Well, I don't know about that. I'm not so sure that Earth is all that common. Yes, I believe that there's a lot of other life out there, but that doesn't mean that planets like ours are a dime a dozen. We have an incredible, rich abundance, superabundance of life and genetic diversity that only exists for this brief moment, cosmically speaking. Earth is 4.5+ billion years old. We've only had complex life really for the last half of a billion years, since what was called the Cambrian explosion, when you start getting complex forms of life. So that's less than 1/10 of the life of this planet. And it's only going to go, by another billion years from now, there will be no life on this planet. The sun will have burned it all off. So we're here for a moment. We're here for a geologic moment where the thin skin of our world has a biosphere that supports life. Well, so that would bring them here for sure, with oceans, and we've got oceans and land. We have really, it's quite amazing. So they would come here to check that out. But then they're looking at these standing up primates, us, who have learned what they've learned. That is, we've learned mathematics, we've learned science, we've learned that there is a kind of physics, to the universe and to reality, which is most animals don't get to that level, but we did. And so they would definitely find us interesting. We've got an intense curiosity and inquisitiveness and ability to manipulate our world. We're sending probes out now into space. That would certainly be interesting to any visiting species. But then they would have to think, what should our attitude toward these people be? First of all, they're at war constantly, nonstop. They never are at peace. Humanity is never at peace. Go back to our history. Never been at peace. Ever since we've settled down with, social hierarchies, last, let's say, 10,000 years, be generous. Go back to Sumer a little bit before that. Since we've had hierarchies, there's always been warfare because there's always been surpluses of goods, and people have tried to steal it from each other. And so you create armies and you create walls, and that's what we do. We cannot help ourselves. If birds had developed hands with opposable thumbs, they'd be doing the same thing. It would be no different. And by the way, I think that any visiting alien species is probably no different as well. They probably were the apex predators of their world as well, which probably is what got them to go out into space. So their difference, possibly, is that they are ahead of the curve here, and they've probably, I'm guessing, have developed a very advanced form of what I might call rationalization. That is a kind of rationalized organization of their society so that things run in a certain way, probably with not a lot of wiggle room for individual initiative and freedom, my opinion. So they look at us and they think these humans are violent as hell. Yes, they're very inquisitive. They notice everything. And they seem a little unstable. We are unstable. We have a very unstable infrastructure. We've only had electricity for less than 200 years. Yeah. We act like this is the normal thing. And without electricity now, we would all die, right? Most people would die. So we're reliant on all of our advanced technology. And we really don't know how stable this is. It hasn't existed very long. We haven't had this long. You know, now we're so hooked on AI. And we've only had AI for a couple of years. If AI were to go away now, we would probably, we'd survive, but it would actually, I think it would be difficult for a lot of bureaucracies now. They become reliant on it. We'd have to make adjustments again.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're going to rely on it in the way we rely on electricity. Maybe not yet if we pulled the plug now, but in the coming couple of years, it's going to be integrated so much into society and systems that we
maybe not yet AI, but let's just say computers in general. You know, electricity, that's Thomas Edison, that's the 1880s. Computers, we've only had for a couple of decades. And imagine if we all lost all of our computers. I mean, international trade would grind to a halt. People would literally starve to death. Right?
Yep.
So we would have to adjust and go back to the analog days, but that would not be easy and would take time. So every new advance we make, we become completely dependent on, and we have to reorganize our societies in order to keep those advances. So therefore, we don't really know how stable we are, because we really haven't had a chance to have a stable. We've created this artificial environment that relies on a lot of moving parts. I mean, look what's happened with the war with Iran. You know, Strait of Hormuz gets closed. That's 20% of the world's oil and fertilizer and a lot of other things that we need for making products. Yeah. And if that continues to be shut off, many parts of the world, it's just going to get much worse. So we have a robust, on one hand, we have a powerful infrastructure, but it's quite fragile at the same time. You could even say brittle, and there's no no surety that it will, and it's permanent. So thinking of from an ET point of view, again, so you have a visiting intelligence. How hard would it be for them to know that our infrastructure probably is not really going to last very long? And they're thinking there's really nothing we can do to help these people. What if that's the case? What if they're looking at our world and they're thinking they are beyond help? Unless we want to come in and lay down the law, create a totalitarian society and force humans. But would that even work? Like they might be thinking about this. I don't think that we're easy to save.
No.
So from a non-human intelligence point of view, they're watching us. Their attitude is, let's just collect whatever information we can. We'll do what we can. Let's collect some DNA because that's really valuable. And their water's awesome. And some of these other minerals are really great. We'll use those. We'll take those. But don't deal with those humans, because that's only trouble.
So is there an argument, though? I was going to say in a more positive light, but I don't even know if it's more positive necessarily. But with AI coming into play, you look at 200 years ago, electricity, 100 years ago, nuclear energy, atomic energy, nuclear weapons. And I'm being very vague with the dates here, obviously, folks, in the years. And then computing, maybe 50 years, we've had computers around in the form they're in now. 20, 30 years, servers come into play. The internet is what it is. Is AI perhaps a point where not only an advanced intelligence monitoring another intelligence goes, this is a checkpoint to see how things go? Because even though we've had the nuclear energy and atomic energy for a while, we still haven't yet blown ourselves up. So while it's not looking great for the way it's used, they do have nuclear power stations, nuclear energy. So there is some good usage. We've then got to this next checkpoint of, okay, this is going to change their society again. This is going to be a major checkpoint. I think we'll look back in decades to come and go, remember AI coming in. I still remember the early days of the internet that my kids can't imagine. There was no Netflix, there was no streaming services, there was no YouTube, there was no social media. I still remember that at 40. So this will be an age where everything is AI and we're so used to it. Does that also mean perhaps that you've got governments around the world that would have known this was coming for many, many more years before we did, that would have think tanked and war gamed all these situations out, that this is a game changer in terms of how our society is going to go? Is this something that starts another cycle or pattern of UFO activity, UAP activity, that we're now at this checkpoint? And is this a reason that you start some kind of disclosure process, whatever that may be?
There's a couple of different thoughts in that. Is really interesting. I do think that a government or think tanks, let's just say, have game planned out the AI revolution and probably have done that for a while. And in fact, I think this is one of the things behind, the infamous World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab saying you will own nothing and be happy, and all of the WEF's really diabolical plans to kind of create a complete espionage state against its own citizens. Because I believe what they probably foresee correctly is that the AI revolution, the tech revolution in general, is just going to put a lot of people out of work, and so you'll have a lot of folks sitting on their hands with nothing to do, and that's a bad situation to be in if you are a government trying to maintain an order to your society. You do not want a restless intelligentsia that's getting more and more pissed off, because that's what revolutions. That's what causes revolution. So I think they made a decision a while ago to create a police state, a global police state, partly because they just can, because why not? If you're running the world, why not want to create a police state? All governments, all organizations always want more power. They never want less power. And they'll justify it in all different ways. Well, we have to keep people safe, blah, blah, blah. But I think they foresee the kind of economic dislocation that is currently happening around the world, where structural unemployment will probably increase. I know people say, oh, well, it's going to create new jobs too. Yeah, but it's shedding a lot of jobs. So I think that's one thing that they have foreseen, and probably adds to their kind of totalitarian direction. I do think that the AI revolution is something that a non-human intelligence would be interested in mapping and seeing. I have no doubt they use their own version of AI. I have no doubt. I was speculating about this 25 years ago about aliens and AI, and I think of course they would, because really all that artificial intelligence really is, when you think about it, is it's a more systematic and rationalized way of processing information than what we've used previously. It's not infallible, obviously, but it's very effective. It's very efficient in many ways, and for that reason, people use it. So it's a more, and when you realize that you live in an informational universe, which is what I think we live in, that's really what, we're driven. We cannot help ourselves. We cannot help ourselves, that we are constantly driving toward greater levels of complexity and rationalization, because that gives us power as a society. Corporations are going to compete with each other. They're going to use every tool at their disposal. Nations and militaries compete with each other. They will use every tool at their disposal. So it's an unending kind of cycle of technological improvements that have now reached a kind of threshold where we've had this artificial intelligence, which is another order of magnitude beyond where we've been. So I think I have very little doubt that in non-human intelligence that's observing us, they are very aware of where we are at. And I think they have to find that interesting. They have to be thinking, how much longer can we operate in relative secrecy and security from these nosy humans? Yeah. More and more humans are talking about us. They could probably gather that. And they might be thinking, what do we do? What is our policy here? That might be an interesting. I would love to be a fly on the wall of an alien conversation about that. What do we do with these humans?
Yeah. Well, there's a million tangents I can go off on here, right? But let's move it on slightly. But I think we've touched on a lot of stuff here. Just before that drop, we had an event on Capitol Hill with David Grusch and a host of other names, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Now, he was on the Capitol steps on the 9th of June, calling out a misappropriation of funds, executive branch agencies illegally shielding UAP programs from Congress. And I wonder, did that feel like the modern corroboration of that national security state that you've mentioned on this podcast, you've written about for decades, the idea that it's being called out now in public view, that what you're being told and how this is all meant to be run is not what's happening. And obviously, as part of it, we're getting the UFO stuff thrown in along for the ride with Grusch and co.
Yeah, I was very supportive of that event. I think it was a very good idea. Think about what you had there. You have David Grusch, who was a guy who had a good, let's say, a very good position within the U.S. intelligence community in connection to UAP. He was part of the UAP task force, for example, and he had a lot of other inroads into that. He is clearly a highly intelligent guy. It's obvious. And he went under oath to U.S. Congress several years ago, under oath to a live congressional event where he talked about the reality of UFO technology and biologics, as he put it. So here's this guy, and now he's present with members of Congress. You had Burchett, you had Burleson, you had Paulina Luna, you had Jared Moskowitz, probably others. So they were there with him. I thought it was a very significant, very historically important moment where I don't think anything's going to come of it, but it was nonetheless a part of the insurgency, as I call it. That is, talking about the need for whistleblower protection, which if there's one thing that you really want in a disclosure movement, you really want and need whistleblower protection. To me, that's probably the number one thing you have to have. There are so many people deep on the inside who would, I think, want to come forward, but there's no way legally that they can do that. There's far too many penalties for them and too much risk. And not just risk to themselves. I've heard many, many times directly risk to one's family, however you want to look at that. So I think you need whistleblower protection. That's what Grusch and the other folks who were there talked about, among other things. So I think what they're trying to do is to apply political and public pressure on the White House and maybe on the Defense Department, War Department, and intelligence agencies. Unfortunately, I don't think they actually generated a lot of that. Media coverage of it was almost non-existent. In our little community, yes, we covered it a bit, but I don't really think it got much broader attention. But really, what I liked about it also is that it wasn't just a UFO story. It was really an oversight story. It was a constitutional story in the sense of, can elected representatives actually examine highly classified programs when those programs involve non-human technology and biological evidence and huge amounts of money hidden from review. So that's really, I think, a big part of what they were talking about. And yeah, I think that was a very, very important and a good thing that they did. I didn't really follow much of the reaction to that. I don't know if it was positive or negative in the community. I imagine probably got a little bit of both, but I thought this was, I thought it was a good thing. I thought it was a good event.
I think the overarching idea of whistleblower protections obviously was huge, encouraging President Trump to sign an executive order to allow folks to bypass NDAs and come forward and talk is a huge part of it. I think what got a lot of folks' attention was David Grusch saying he was aware of a compendium of life from bipedal life forms to sentient plasmoids. What was your take on? And I think that does show something. You said earlier, can you imagine in going back to 2010 or 2000 and someone coming out and dropping files? Can you imagine 15, 20, 30 years ago, a former intelligence officer coming out live on the steps of the Capitol and saying, we are aware of a compendium of life from bipedal life to sentient plasmoids, and the reaction that would have got? Whereas now it's just, and it moves on to the next story.
It's a good question. Like, how would that have been? I think a lot of people would have just dismissed it as crazy talk, if even 20 years ago, they said, that's insane. He's insane. But if he's there with members of Congress, which he was, that would have been an interesting thing. It would have certainly gotten more attention, much more attention than it's gotten. I think it's gotten almost no attention, right, in our society, other than in our, people who follow UAP. But it's not part of a public conversation. Whereas I think 20 years ago, it would have been part of a big public conversation.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you just for your own knowledge, Richard, that first batch of UFO files in early May, I think it was the 8th of May, got quite a lot of UK coverage, quite a bit, across news platforms, broadsheets, radio, for a couple of days too. The second batch, a little bit, but not too much. The third batch and the Grusch event, silence in the UK, like dead silence. Like they might as well have not happened.
Yeah, I believe that. I think the UK, honestly, I don't want to make you feel bad, but I think the UK's coverage of this subject is some of the worst in the world. I think the UK media, and I've noticed this like for many, many decades now, there's just something almost pathological in the media structure of the United Kingdom relating to the UAP subject that completely prevents a really sophisticated, honest discussion of it. I don't really know why, but it doesn't seem to be possible.
You can't speak, and this is from personal experience. I'm fortunate that people ask me to comment on news and TV and radio when these things happen, and there's still this giggle factor that you see presenters like scoffing and smirking and laughing, and now and again, it's news channels in the UK are such a dying breed because the viewing figures are like really. I get more downloads and views on this podcast than most news channels in the UK. And that's not me blowing my own trumpet, Richard. That's just that I know what some of them get. Big channels. And I was on GB News, which in the UK is I think, again, politically more right than left. It's very right-leaning in terms of its politics. But they cover the UFO topic more than any other channel. And actually, some of the presenters are quite into the topic. And that's from when I've been on air with them. That one of the guys, I can't remember the guy's name, but one young guy particularly, actually during my interview, it was himself and his female colleague. And she was a little bit, not derogatory, but quite laughy about it and going, oh, come on, really, Andy, you think UFOs? And he turned round and was like, no, seriously. And he rhymed off all this stuff. And he almost got to the point where he was defending it. But that's so few and far between where it still laughs and smirks. And I know Lou Elizondo was on Gillian Michaels' podcast recently, and people were like, oh, it was ontological shock. But she just sat with a horrible face on her. And I think that's still, I'm told that's what her face is always like, to be honest. But there was no ontological shock. She just couldn't believe what she was hearing and she kept looking off screen as well. Again, I'm told she does this a lot, but it was more of a really, really. And I think there's still a lot of that in the mainstream.
Yeah, they're like basically a modern version of the Soviet Union. Really, when you think about it, I mean, it's actually no different. That society especially toward the end, was such a disconnect between actual reality and what the media was telling people. Like they all realized, like, this media is completely and hopelessly and totally out of touch with reality. And I think that's what you see in a lot of the West. UK is a great example, but it's not unique. I think it's just a result of basically the Western world in general not wanting to come to terms with the fact that it's no longer invincible and it's living in the past. And so there's this kind of hidebound nature to a lot of Western commentary in the US, in the UK, in Europe, that I get the feeling like they're clutching onto this reality that they know at some level is slipping away, but they can't let go of the past, and this is what you get, I think.
Can I ask your opinion on this? And I think this goes for the US as well. Again, as an outsider looking into the United States, but also someone who lives in the UK and what I see elsewhere. The general public, and I include myself in that, obviously, right, has never been more detached from mainstream media. Newspapers are dying because people don't read. And also, why would you wait? There are reasons to read, but why would you wait for your news the following day when you can get it within seconds and from 50 different camera angles? You know, a mass shooting happens, then you've got people on the balcony next door in the hotel Instagram living it and TikTok, and you don't wait till the next day to get that news. 9/11, live, instant reaction, bang. Oh my God,
Yeah.
the second plane's hit the tower. You don't wait the next day for the newspapers. So
No.
newspapers are a dying thing, right? And the news media and TV, people have never seemed to distrust it any less than they do now. Yet it seems to me, and this goes for government too, there's never been more of a distrust of governments across the Western world. Yet people still seem to be waiting on these same institutions to almost, maybe not folks who listen to my show or your show, right, because they're into the topic, but they're waiting on permission from these organizations to engage in this topic. And I mean the general public. It's like, you're not allowed to fully believe this yet. It's still, the US is obviously better at reporting this, but in the UK, you're not allowed to really look into this yet. This is still about aliens, little green men, and the X-Men music in these segments. And there seems to be this disconnect for me of, you don't trust any of the media, yet when they laugh and joke about UFOs, yeah, they're right. So I don't understand why there's still that disconnect with the public. On one hand, they're waiting on permission, but for so many other things, they don't need to wait on it anymore.
Yeah. I don't know if I know a single person who reads newspapers, by the way. I have
I don't anymore.
I have one friend who's in his mid 80s, and he still reads newspapers.
Can I trump you on that? My wife's gran is 102.
Yes.
And she still gets a newspaper.
Good for her.
Yeah.
I mean, really good for her. That's great. No, but I don't really know. I haven't read an actual newspaper. I mean, if there's one in front of me, if I'm waiting somewhere, but I don't think I've read newspaper in ages. So, but you're asking a different question, which is, I'm not quite sure I'm getting all of it. It's like, people don't trust their government. They certainly don't. They don't trust their media. They certainly don't. But you're asking, like, but we're still sort of waiting around for the government to tell us what we want to hear. That's basically,
you're allowed permission to follow this topic,
Yeah.
to look into it, to believe it's real, to believe it's true.
I think because, honestly, I think at a basic level, I mean, human beings, we are intensely social creatures. We don't want to admit that sometimes. We like to think, I make up my own mind, I'm my own person. But we need to be, and we are deeply social creatures. And we, I think, have a basic foundational, I'll say, need to kind of be in line with the authority of our society. We're in an era where no one wants to admit that, we want a proper authority in our world, but I think people really do. We want a world in which there is a responsible authority in charge, is what I believe. Some people like, that's bullshit, or I make my own decisions. But truthfully, this is what I think. So I think we're angry because we don't have authority, at least in the Western world, that we really can believe in. We don't believe in them, and the truth is, we shouldn't believe in them. They're not. I mean, when you look at the leadership in literally any Western society, how can you believe in these people?
Mm.
You know, I mean, you go from bad to worse. So, and that is because the Western world in particular, right up until the Ukraine war and right up until COVID, I think was seeing itself right on track to lock down a kind of global system with it in charge. And so what that really meant is that literally every single Western leader was basically appointed by the World Economic Forum or put into place by a behind-the-scenes shadow group, which I think is true. And I think people can kind of sense that. Some people study this, some people just feel it in their bones, but they know there's something wrong with our political system. It's not responsive to people. So we shouldn't trust these guys. But we want, I think we want, I would even say crave, perhaps, a kind of responsible hierarchy that we can believe in. But the problem is we have an ideology where we reject hierarchy. We have an ideology where we reject basically even taking orders for the most part. So we don't really know what to do with that. But I think people basically want the feeling of living in an ordered society, and part of that order means having a reciprocal, like, social contract with your government, where, you know, that's the whole concept of Western politics, is social contract theory. You could say it's like we agree to give up certain rights and license to act in certain ways in order to have a government that has a monopoly on legitimate use of violence, basically, to create order to allow the rest of us to thrive. I mean, that's a social contract, and that's really broken. You know, we don't really have a social contract. So we're in a very unsatisfactory position where we don't believe in our government, but we kind of realize it's hard to live without a government, and we don't really know how to get a government to be responsive to us. I think that's basically the problem we have. We don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Like, how can we get governments actually to respond properly to the people in a way that is helpful and beneficial and in their best interest?
Mm.
You can dust off the guillotine, chop off some heads. You do that, and other people will go right back into the place, and they'll, you know, like the great song by The Who, goodbye to the old boss, say hello to the new boss. Right.
We're probably closer to the movie, and this is so difficult for me to say in my accent, but The Purge, or The Purge. I think you've seen it. Purge, you know, the one where like the US have decided basically one night a year for 12 hours, all crime is legal. You can do what you want. Basically, society. You should watch it. It's the actual concept's really good. It's now spawned a whole series of movies where society's got to a point where things are bad. People need a release, and this. And I can't remember. There are now movies that go into the whole background of it, but this new government's come in that's a little bit more radical, and they decide, let's give people one night to go and do whatever they want. The rest of the year, everything is law abiding, no murder, but literally murder is legal for this night. So people have these like home security systems, and again, it's like the richer and wealthier you are, the more likely you are to survive the night.
Yeah.
But obviously, the youth or the poor. But then you get like hordes of really rich frat boys who go out in masks and shoot and stab and kill. And it's
sounds like a Clockwork Orange. You remember that?
Yeah, a little bit like that. Yeah, where they can do what they want, and it's all fine on this night. But it's a good series of movies, and it just seems like we're we're much closer to a purge type scenario happening than anything.
That is like the stupidest idea. I mean, that's a great way to destroy your society. It's like, just, we'll do whatever you want for one night. Kill anyone. Like, undermine the last vestige of social trust that exists in society. A good way to destroy your society.
I dread to think, though, Richard, if a government came in with that idea, how many people would actually vote for it in this day and age, right enough, given where we are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sure there are people who would. I sometimes wonder, like, how much should I say here? I've lost so much faith in our society and in our future as a civilization. I don't really know if I believe in it the way that I once did. And I don't like to say that because people, at least people I talk to, they want me to believe, they want me to believe in a better future. I would like to believe in a better future. I just don't know that I do. So, I look around and I see a society that doesn't read anymore, where more than half the population's on some kind of medication, antidepressants. I'm like, that's a sign of like massive fucked upness of your entire civilization. There's something wrong when like half or more than half of the people are on some kind of SSRI or some kind of medication. I don't really know what the number is, but it's a lot. It's just symptomatic that we're doing something deeply, deeply disturbingly unhealthy to ourselves that even prompts all the mental illness treatments that are out there. Like, there's obviously something wrong with what we're doing to ourselves as a civilization that's causing this. You go to look at nations like South Korea. They're not making babies. They're like headed towards extinction. Much of Europe, much of the Western world is not making babies. Why not? Well, it's a sign, I think, of something I'm going to say literally unnatural or anti-natural that's causing us to react in ways that are deeply dysfunctional to social health. And everyone lives alone in front of their little screen nowadays. People don't know how to talk to each other, have eye-to-eye communication. I mean, there's obviously so many things that are wrong, and it just makes me wonder, so we think disclosure is going to help? It's going to make us better? Disclosure is going to make us more mature? I used to think that disclosure would prompt a lot of people, at least I had a hope that it would prompt a lot of us to look at our lives and think, have I been wasting my life? Because here's an example of an intelligence that operates on a different level than us. That would give us the idea that there may be possible ways of living our lives according to different principles and maybe deeper or maybe more meaningful. I used to think, I used to try to convince myself of that. I don't think I believe that anymore. I don't know that we have much of a capability. I mean, I would like to see comments on this thread of people saying, I disagree with you. Here's why. And I hope that there are people who do that, because I'd be open to that. But I just don't really have, I don't really think I have that belief anymore. And I don't know that I've ever really expressed it until right now in a public manner. Even on my own channel, I don't really think I've gone this far, but I'm doing it here. So.
Well, I appreciate the honesty, and I think you've always got to kind of seek out that honesty. We'll keep the dark, somber tone going, Richard, because again, as a Scotsman, this feeds my soul. So yeah, if this was all happy, loving, light, and there are so many podcasts you can listen to for that kind of stuff, folks out there. I do want to ask, and this is going to be non-spoiler because some folks still haven't seen it, Richard, and I'm going to give another week or two before I talk about it openly. I know you haven't seen Disclosure Day. Right. And we're talking about disclosure, and so many folks wanted your thoughts on various different aspects of it. I know you've heard a lot about it, and I know you've got the right idea. Let me just frame it this way. So many people, let's get grumpy, right? Great name for a podcast. So many people, especially in the UFO community, had their heart set on this movie was going to be Disclosure. This was Spielberg telling us the truth, and Spielberg knew so much. Actually, I've had nothing but conversations largely with people, both UFO-wise and even still today in the gym with one of my mates who was like, mate, I'm a big movie fan. I went to see that. What? Like, not what they expected. They were hoping for something else. There was disappointing aspects of the film for them. But it's just, for me, I hoped it was going to be a film that was going to move the needle in terms of the conversation and maybe wake a few people up. And I'm sure there will be people who have gone to see it and went, oh, that was really interesting. I'm going to go look at this. Coming out of it, though, I think far, far fewer than I had hoped would be doing that.
Well, I saw the first trailer of it many months ago, and a lot of people were excited about it. I never got excited about it. I saw the trailer, the teaser, and I thought, oh, man, this does not look good. That's really what I thought. I'll just say I'm a hopeless snob when it comes to movies and books. You know, I'm an old English lit major, but and everyone knows we're all assholes and snobs. Like we all think that we know more than others. But it's like when it comes to movies, I have not seen. I really think Hollywood is almost incapable of making anything that's decent any longer. They've just and so when Spielberg came out with this, I just thought this looks stupid. I just have to say, it did not look like it was going to be a good movie. And I've listened to some reviews and I've watched some more clips, and my wife and I will probably see it this week.
Yeah.
I do plan to see it very soon. So I'm hoping I'm going to go in with an open mind. If I think it's good, I will tell you, I think this is a great movie. Good job, Steven Spielberg. But I seriously doubt that I'm going to think that. I think actually it's going to probably be cringy and embarrassing. I have a feeling the thing is, here's one thing I do know. The star of this is Emily Blunt. She's a weather lady. So like this really seems to revolve around the mainstream establishment putting out a message that the world is going to listen to. I mean, if I'm wrong about that, then you can tell me I'm wrong. But
no,
that is the case.
And that's not a spoiler because that's all the trailers. Yeah.
Utter ridiculous bullshit. I mean, this is not 1980. This is not that world. It's like we have such a fractured society. Does anyone honestly think if some news media were to come out and say, yes, aliens are real, that everyone's going to believe it? Probably very few people will probably believe it. There are going to be people out there saying this is wrong. This is complete nonsense. Like it will instantly start. It'll stoke the culture wars even more than they are now. We don't have a unified society, not even remotely. And I get this idea that Spielberg's acting like there's this mainstream establishment that people somehow listen to. Like I'm listening to my grandfather talk about disclosure here. Like I saw one reviewer called it, what did she say? Boomer fantasy. I thought, yeah, that sounds like it. That could be right. So now I look forward to the car chase scenes. I heard there's a couple of car chase scenes. That'll probably be the high point of the movie for me. But I don't really expect it to have, even my friend Bryce Abel, who is way more positive on Spielberg than I am, and way more optimistic about disclosure than I've ever been. He was disappointed. He did a review of it on his channel. And I was like, good, I'm glad to hear that because I won't feel as bad if I end up wanting to trash this film, which I have this feeling that I'm going to watch it and I'm just going to hate it. I'm going in expecting to hate this movie. Now, I'm admitting that I'm like, if I think there are good things about it, I will definitely say that. But I have this feeling that it's going to be a real disappointment.
Well, let me know your thoughts once you've seen it. Drop me an email. I'll drop you an email and remind you. But yeah, I'll say no more about it. Folks should still go and see it. I gave it an 8 out of 10, perhaps 7.5, 7.5 out of 10. I like movies. Someone asked me, what would I give it as a UFO guy and what would I give it as a movie guy? Yeah. And I think I said as a movie guy, like 7 out of 10. As a UFO guy, like 7.5, maybe 8.
My question about it is, in your opinion, I'm going to ask you a question here. Do you think that Spielberg accurately conveys the UFO or UAP or alien reality in a way that is realistic? Because it didn't strike me that he did that. It struck me that he engaged in a kind of fantastical, like, we're bad because we tortured an alien, like that kind of thing. I think that's what he gets into, that kind of thing.
In some ways he does, but it seems to me that he tried to make 3 or 4 different movies. He tried to make a thriller, a horror, a romantic comedy or comedy, and there is comedy, which is divisive, and like an espionage type movie,
Yeah, right.
and it kind of doesn't fall into any category. Do you know what I saw? For example, this is totally non-spoiler. I think you could change the movie in some ways and make it a pretty good horror movie, for like 15 plus. But you could change it in a couple of ways and also make it a slapstick rom-com family escapade with Paul Rudd and Jennifer Aniston. Like, genuinely, either way, and I don't think that's a good thing. It's like, what do you want to be?
That's a
Almost
really
like
good
if
point.
they needed more time to there are themes there, and that's why I gave it an 8, where I'm like, oh, that was, and there are some moments where I'm like, that's really cool. I like that. But it just wasn't the movie I expected to see given the
Here's
trailers.
me. I have a simple rule. Like, I will like any movie, I will like any show that has what I consider to have psychological realism. So, in other words, I want to be able to believe in the characters. I don't have to believe that this, like, if it's a science fantasy, that's fine.
Mm.
But I have to believe that there's an accurate psychological, realistic response to what's going on. Otherwise, I'm out. I don't like superhero movies. They just bore me. It's like I
I would
find
say there
nothing more
is.
stupid than a superhero movie, to be honest with you. Unless there's psychological, like I thought Joker, the Heath Ledger Joker in that Batman movie, that was genius because that was
Yeah.
psychologically realistic, and that's a character you can believe. And so that's all I asked for. And I just have this feeling that I will be unable to believe in any of the characters in this movie. I just have a feeling.
Mm.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I just I'm doubtful. And I'm doubtful that I'll believe in the scenarios that he presents. But again, I'll go in and I'll try not to bitch, in front of my wife too much. Tracy can't stand watching some movies with me sometimes because I'll throw things at the TV. I get all I'm a crotchety, grumpy old man sometimes. I'm like, this is ridiculous, and I'll throw things. So I won't do that in the movie. I ruined one of the Star Wars movies for her years ago for that, but I don't regret what I said. So I'll be on better behavior for this.
Well, listen, let's keep it dark. A lot of folks have been talking now for some time, Richard, and I'm sure we must have talked about this on one of our past interviews. I've been lucky to speak to you quite a few times now about this idea of something coming or heading our way, and the dates of 2027 being thrown out, and we've also had 2036. Just the other week, I think, have you been a guest with Lou Elizondo on his tour?
No.
No.
We chat. I just no, I haven't got.
Okay.
Why?
I know he's thrown out. I know there's a few folks that are heading along. So last week he had Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp.
Yeah.
And Jeremy asked Lou 5 questions during the tour on stage, and one of them was around this idea that something is heading our way potentially in 2027. The whole somber comment that Lou has kind of hung his hat on quite a lot. And he says on the news media and things like that too, he often refers to it and defers the answer to be around people should love their families, love their children, give them hugs. And there is quite a melodramatic tone around his answers. He doesn't go, no, there's nothing to it. I'm curious what you think around this idea that is being peddled, that perhaps we are heading towards an event or a something happening. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I heard about this. I don't know. I'll have to ask him. I don't ever like when people make predictions like this. I always think it's a really bad idea. They never turn true, first of all. They are never, ever true. We've been having predictions in this community since I've been in part of this community for close to 30 years now. And none of them have come true. Not a single one. Whether positive or negative. I remember Ascension in 2012. Oh yeah, that was probably the most cringy, embarrassing moment that lasted several years in this community when people thought, oh yeah, 2012, it's going to change everything. Or then there were people who were convinced that there's an alien craft coming and certain people have created their underground bunkers to protect themselves against it. And just fear, more and more fear mongering, or predictions. Chris Bledsoe made some predictions for this year. They did not come true.
He moved the dates. He did say Easter, then moved it to October.
Yeah. Well, count me as not a believer. And I like Chris personally. I just don't believe that. I don't believe it at all. So now when Lou goes and says, like, something's coming, is it a ship? Is it this? Is it that? Doubtful. I don't believe it. I'll just say right now, I don't believe these predictions. I think I don't know what's behind his in this case. I think people, we get so wrapped up in our own ideology, our own mindset. I think sometimes we lose perspective. So I don't trust prediction makers unless, scratch it. If you are making a prediction out of a trend that is happening now and you are trying to extrapolate, that is totally fair. Just, don't pretend that you have the final inside knowledge, that something such and such is going to go down on such and such a date. Because really you could, if you really wanted to make a project out of it, someone listening should do this. Just like research all of the failed predictions in the UFO field alone in the last 30 years. Like, you would fill pages and pages and pages. It's embarrassing. So I think Ixnay with the predictions peg. No predictions. Stop with the predictions. But the thing is, people are drawn to them. Like, people love predictions. Yeah. They can't get enough of it. And it's very unfortunate. That's an easy way to get hosed, man. It's an easy way to get taken advantage of.
So, easy way to get hosed. That has to be a cutting to put up for Richard. I don't think I've ever heard you say on your own channel it's an easy way to get hosed, Richard. So, yeah.
Well, I live with a Canadian, so keep that in mind. They like those expressions.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, that's fair enough. So I'm going to read you one listener question because I'm still going through stuff, but this was one I thought was interesting, and it was from Stumpy on YouTube. Stumpy said, I always feel that Richard Dolan is holding something dark back. He's literally the greatest of all time in this field, but I get the sense at the core of whatever's going on here, it's dark. Not demonic dark, but that we may be dealing with something that is bad, very bad. I don't know if that's a question, but I'm curious what you and him feel about this. It's speculation, but a lot of evidence points to something that doesn't have our best interest in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's actually kind of spot on. But I think the thing that I see that is dark is, yes, there's reason to think that there are multiple intelligences that are observing and interacting with us. There's reason to think that some of those intelligences are not malevolently disposed toward us. But there is reason to think if you really want to go down into the rumor mill, but sometimes you want to do that, there has been reason to think that maybe at least one group does not have our interests at heart. I think that's possibly true. But the group that I would be the most afraid of is literally ourselves. I think I'm more afraid of humanity than I am of any visiting group at this point. I think the reason that I have a dark view, and I guess I do, I just have to own up to it, is that I don't really think that we human beings have anywhere near the agency that we think we have, that we have the ability to guide our society in any way that is other than by the force of our technological development. Like, we are completely and utterly dependent on the technological society that we have created that gives us more power, gives us longer lifespan, gives us a lot of benefits that we love, right? But we are dependent upon it, and we have essentially divorced ourselves from the rest of the planet in a way that I consider to be very deeply unhealthy. And I just have a feeling we're really only going to be here for a short period of time, because people talk about climate change. What I never hear people talking about is the fact that we live in an interglacial period in an ice age. We live in an ice age. We live in an ice age. Earth has been in an ice age now for a couple of million years, especially the last 1 million years. It's been punctuated by usually 80,000 years of like massive ice sheets, and then 15,000 years at a time of, oh, wow, nice warm weather, which we are in right now. And if you look at the chart, it's extremely consistent. And you would see us at the high point, where we have reached this high point a number of other times in the last million years. And where some people are saying it's global warming isn't going to keep going up, I keep saying we're at the end. We're about 12 to 15,000 years in, and we're primed to have another ice age. But whatever happens, if what I guess I would say is Earth's climate is not stable, has never really been stable. We have been in a remarkably, unusually stable climatic period of Earth's history, these last 12,000 years. Since the end of the Younger Dryas. So we're just on borrowed time, man. We're on borrowed time. So what would Europe do? Or what would North America do if the ice sheets came back? And by the way, all evidence shows that when they come back fast. So maybe within a couple of generations or a century. I'll tell you what would happen. The human civilization would not have time to adjust. And it would cause massive warfare, dislocation of people. We wouldn't be prepared for it. So we're on a very thin little skin of a planet, of a rock. There's a little bit of life, there's a lot of life, but is in a tenuous and historically unstable position. So I just think it doesn't give me a dark view. I think it just gives me a realistic view. I look at what we are as a species. And I mean, I marvel. We do amazing things. We have an incredible ability to engage in profound ideas and generosity. There's a lot of good things about humanity. But I think pretty much we're like a special at one of my favorite grocery stores. Here today, gone tomorrow. So I think that is life. So when Lou Elizondo is saying, love your family, I think that's actually great advice. I think the one thing that we really should always remind ourselves is that this life is a gift, and it's a beautiful thing. And there's an old bumper sticker I remember, something like, the worst day of fishing is better than the best day at work. And you could say the worst day of living is still better than not being here at all, because we're lucky to be here. I still am sad over the loss of my friend and colleague Nick Pope, who was a couple of years younger than me, and Nick's gone. I like to think, because I do have a spiritual belief, I like to think that he's in a place that he's enjoying and is good, but he's not here, so he doesn't get to go outside and enjoy the breeze and look at the beautiful trees and listen to birds. There's a lot to be grateful for. And I think what I hope to do for whatever time I've got here, because we always go sooner than we think, right? I want to be able to genuinely have gratitude for every day that I have, because they're worth having. So I'm a little bit black-pilled, yes, but not in a way that makes me depressed and sad. And I mean, most of the time I think I'm actually pretty upbeat, and I try to enjoy every day, because every day is worth enjoying. Every day brings something really cool. And honestly, you want to know what really keeps me going? I mean, I'm married to a great woman, and we live in a great place here. But what keeps me going is my curiosity about the world. I have a genuinely insatiable curiosity about pretty much everything I can imagine. Certainly about this subject we've been talking about, but a lot of other things too. And so as long as I have that, I'm happy. I can explore things and learn new things. I actually really get into that. It's
Yeah,
fun.
no, that's a good. You've put it across well. And before we talk about your book, I do want to ask you news in the last kind of day or so. Avi Loeb, Professor Avi Loeb, has announced online that he said on X, I was tasked by the White House, Arrow, the ODNI, the FBI, and the intelligence community, which, what a hell of a way to start a sentence straight away there, to lead and assemble a team of scientists and experts for a new UAP Science Advisory Council. The council includes Professor Carol Cleland, Professor Richard Clote, Dr. Omar Eldadi, Tim Gallaudet, Ross Howard, Dr. Devesh Nandal, Gary Nolan, Regina Sarmiento, Michael Shermer, Professor Peter Scaffish, Matthew Jagadis, and Jennifer Valor. There's a few names in there that folks will be aware of. Obviously, your Jagadis, your Nolan, your Gallaudet, your Scaffish. Michael Shermer, though, is one that a lot of folks have raised eyebrows at as someone who is not only a noted skeptic, but has been incredibly derisory about the topic and people involved within the topic. I think some noted barbs toward David Grusch were published too. What's your thoughts on this? I've not even shared my thoughts yet on it, Richard, so I'll let you go first. But
Yeah.
yeah.
On the one hand, you want skeptical voices. You always want skeptical voices on a study like that. If nothing else, look, you have to have alternate opinions on a body like that, and it wouldn't be probably politically viable, I'm going to guess, if it didn't have some kind of skeptical position on there. I think that's probably the reality. Someone like Shermer, I mean, Michael Shermer he's a very intelligent guy, but he, as anyone who follows him has known, when you become a publicly acknowledged person in your field, it's very difficult actually to change your opinion publicly on almost anything because you develop your own audience. And I say that for people who believe in UFOs like myself as much as anyone. You establish a kind of a public turf, and then you become kind of committed to that. For my part, I have always tried, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, to break free of expectations that people have of me in my own beliefs. And I've gone through my own journey, my own road. Michael Shermer is more established as a skeptic, and I think he probably. I have a feeling, and well, I want to be careful what I say here, but I think a lot of skeptics privately are more open to this phenomenon than they may publicly say, because they have a public position that essentially requires them at this point in their lives to act and talk a certain way. But I don't know that they all believe this. I don't know about Shermer per se, but it wouldn't surprise me if you had a couple of beers with him off the record. He might. I'm not saying I know this for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me that he might have a different opinion. So I don't really know what I think about that. What I think is important for a team like that is that it be genuinely multidisciplinary. I suspect that it is. And I'm glad Gary Nolan is part of that. Gary Nolan, I think, is a good presence on this. His opinion is I don't really care what political leaders have to say about disclosure. The only thing I care about is, can it be discussed in a peer-reviewed scientific journal like this reality? And I think that's actually a very intelligent position for a scientist to take. So I think that's a good thing to have him on there. What do you think about Shermer's inclusion?
I 100% understand the having a skeptic on board. I agree with the sentiments. There are probably skeptics who, outside of their finding their tribe and having their audience, which no doubt supports them financially, whether it's their ego, whether it's pounds or dollar signs that drives them, whatever it may be. That goes across even the UFO community as well. There are loads of folks who enjoy the ego and celebrity that comes with it and arguing a cause, and they would find something else. I think my broader concern is there a danger? And I do feel better about a Gary Nolan being on there. I've spoken to a lot of the folks involved there from a UAP perspective, UFO perspective, Peter Scaffish, Matthew Gigadis just recently as well. Is there an element, no, I'm worried about the control of the conversation and the control of those people where, and like I say, with Avi's initial statement around the FBI, ODNI, Arrow is still one that a lot of people don't have trust in, the intelligence community, all of a sudden have got
No
all
one who
these
has any
figures.
knowledge has trust in Arrow. No one.
Yeah.
Go on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
But yeah, no, but you're right. But I understand people are saying with under Kozlowski, they are a bit different, and it's taken a long time for them to throw off the spectre of Sean Kirkpatrick that's loomed large over that organisation since its inception and still does. But just in general, it just seems like you've got all these figures involved in the UFO topic who are now under the umbrella much closer to the secrecy and the gatekeepers. And is that just another way of controlling? I'm not too sure. Especially somebody like Avi Loeb, who has always been quite outspoken about control and transparency, and how if Project Galileo was going to find something, they're not at the whims of the US government or politics. It just seems like you've got two worlds there, kind of combining, and I'm not sure really how I feel about that. I'm more wary than anything at the minute.
Well, I agree with you basically in your attitude on this. I mean, the thing is, anytime you get an established academician involved in this, you really, I mean, that includes Avi Loeb. He's at Harvard. You really do have to wonder, because the academic world has really not produced much of value on this subject. I mean, really, it's you consider the amount of intellectual power that would exist in the academic world, and how meaningless and paltry the actual level of thinking has been coming from that world. It's really quite remarkable. So you're dealing with a very powerful part of the establishment. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. These are this is U.S. government establishment directive to look into a topic that has profound and powerful implications in, let's just list them: national security, society, technology, cosmology, our beliefs. It has profound implications in terms of constitutional legality, and so much more. So this is not a subject that we should ever expect the United States government to just say to a group, yes, go off and do your thing, and whatever conclusions you come to, that's just great. Seriously doubt that'll happen. So you're right. This is going to be a controlled operation to some extent. It could be to a very large extent. Like, how could one not expect the most powerful government in the world, running a global empire, having maintained UFO secrecy for 80 plus years, to just walk away from the table and say, yeah, go off and do your own little study? They're going to try to control that as much as they can, and to guide that information flow as much as they can. I have no doubt.
And as part of this, Chris Sharp at Liberation Times, he's reported today, and literally this has kind of been as I was preparing for this interview and ready to record.
I really like Chris.
Yeah, saying the US government has actually established a new interagency body to coordinate UAP investigations, improve the collection and analysis of relevant data, and assist with the declassification of UAP-related information. So it's not just this one, it's almost like this is the science advisory aspect of it, and it's going to be a bigger organisation. Now, for me, the ODNI released a statement to Liberation Times saying, to support the President's directive on UAP transparency, ODNI, alongside FBI, Department of War, established a UAP governance board to provide guidance, recommendations, and coordination at the interagency level, bringing together military, law enforcement, the intelligence community, and other civilian agencies. So it's going to be, the UAP governance board is going to be supported by several advisory groups with expertise outside of the US government, of which it looks like this one headed up by Avi Loeb is like the scientific aspect of it. So again, to me, it seems like an even bigger dome over the topic. And is it almost like Hungry Hippos, where they're just smashing and siphoning off stuff into different groups and boards? Will this mean these people are less likely to speak and talk more publicly? I think obviously we don't know yet. It's all very new. But yeah, I'm just really wary of if we are at a point to go way back to what you said earlier, Richard, where there's a small group of insurgents, there is a kind of mini revolution inside, maybe some of the private contractors, maybe some of the government agencies, maybe some of the military. Small groups of folks are trying to get information out and they're finding massive pushback. So as part of it, we get a little bit of something with the War.gov site, with some of the UFO files dropping. This to me could go either way. Is this something positive? Or is this these gatekeepers and the folks fighting back going, do you know what? Yeah, you're right. Let's take a bit more control of this narrative. Let's create a board. We're in charge of this. Bang.
It's really both. I mean, think of any revolutionary group. Are they all sweetness and light? The French Revolution, they certainly went into crazy town. The American Revolution, you could find a lot of criticisms about the founding fathers. You could just say, yeah, they started a revolution so they could then take over and make money unimpeded by the crown in the UK, which was true. Not everyone's motives are for the absolute greater public good, and that includes the UAP insurgents that I talked about. I know the politics of many of those people, and I certainly do not agree with a lot of the things that they believe. I have a strong suspicion, unproven, that some people involved in that are probably trying to get patents on technology that could make them a lot of money. And but for that, maybe some UAP transparency would be helpful. I'm just saying, just a possibility. Not everyone's motives are sweetness and light. Does that mean that they should be opposed or that they're evil? Well, it just means that they're human. It just means that they're human beings. I don't expect pristine motives from anybody, whether government or whether they're this group here. Everyone's always looking out for their own interest. And if that coincides with the demands of truth, then that's awesome. But it doesn't always do that. So I think, I'm reminded of the title of one of Nietzsche's books, Human, All Too Human. And I expect that this task force or this advisory board is what it sounds like. I don't really see a lot coming out of it. I don't see a lot coming out of it, but it sounds like it's got a very vague mandate, frankly. And what is it exactly going to be coordinating? Are they going to have anything to do with future releases of declassified documents? It's really not clear. If there's something viable that they can actually do, that could be a good thing. Most of those people in the group, I don't really know them.
Yeah,
I have suspicions about. I would have suspicions about a lot of them, I bet, though.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. Time will tell in the next couple of days and weeks. I think folks like myself and yourself will be looking into this more as information comes out. And like I say, there's even just today more information coming out to say it looks more like a bigger organisation with advisory groups coming off the side of it. So I'll dig more into the Chris Sharp articles and whatnot there too. I've actually never had Chris on the podcast before, so as much as we've spoken a couple of times back in the day, maybe time to speak to Chris. But listen, Richard, let's close out with USOs Volume 2. So, God, what has it been a year since Volume 1? Less than a year now, isn't it? It was
a little over 1 year. I published the first volume in, I think it was the end of February of 2025.
God.
And I wanted the second volume out a little earlier. I always want them out earlier than they come out. They're always a little longer and slower. But this one did come out in just about a month ago, May, and I'm very pleased with it. You have your copy. I've got my copy. So yeah, there it is. I love that book. I have to say, I'm very happy with it. So it's a big fat 400 pages. It's got a lot of USO, unidentified submersed or submersible, submerged objects that I collected. And for someone who is not familiar with the series, there'll be a third volume, and I think that'll be out in a year, and that'll conclude the trilogy. But I started on this path, I think about 4 years ago, just by research. I've always been interested in USOs. I mean, who could not be? It's inherently fascinating. And I looked into a couple of USO cases, I think around 2022, and I thought, this is really quite interesting. And I thought, where are these cases? They're scattered all over the place. They're scattered in all these different databases and books. And I thought I would like to hunt them down and just see how many there are. And that turned into my research. And there was a couple of databases that were useful. Some of those databases no longer exist. I was able to do a rip of one of them before it completely closed down. That was UFO.net by the late Carl Feind. He was a very good researcher on this. Thank God I ripped his site because it doesn't exist any longer. So there's different sources like that, and a lot of out of print magazines, out of print books, and I just collected. And what I started to realize, like, this is a massive subject that had hardly ever been treated in a serious way in book form. A couple of books over the years, not many at all. And so I wanted to, once I collected enough of the cases, I just wanted to do as complete of a treatment of them as I could. And my main goal was, I just thought it was a horrible tragedy that these incredible cases have nearly all been forgotten. 99% of the cases that I have in here have just been totally unknown. One or two were known even to researchers. So I thought they've just been lost. And when you visualize what these cases were, what these events were, and how incredible they had to be to the witnesses involved, I thought, you can't let them be lost. So I wanted to kind of give them a new life and write them out in a way that did justice to them, and did justice to the witnesses who were there and to the people who investigated them at the time. And I thought that these stories should not be lost. That was really my motivation. Once I completed all of that, my wife, who always has good advice, gave me a bit of advice on this one. She said, it would be really nice if you had categories in front of every case, like a kind of a boil it down. Like, this is, what color was the craft? What did it do? Did it enter the water? Did it emerge from the water? What shape was it? And all of these factors. And I ended up going back over all of the cases, and I extracted those facts. And then from that, I created a large spreadsheet, which I'd never created a spreadsheet before. And this was a massive one. But I'm so glad I did that, because by seeing those cases laid out that way, I was able to see patterns, and I was able to engage in a kind of analysis. Like at the very beginning of this program, I said my biggest interest in this field is a kind of behavioral analysis of these craft. And this is the reason why, because I was able to study behavioral patterns in these USO craft that I would never have noticed had I not done that legwork. So there's so many things. So in this particular volume, so the first volume covers a long period of time, from what I consider the earliest legit USO cases up until the end of 1969. So that covers a long period of time. The second volume only covers 2 decades, the 1970s and the 1980s. That's it. And I think I wrote in the introduction, this period suffers the typical fate of the middle child, because it's the middle volume in the series, and it's easy to get forgotten. But in a lot of ways, the 1970s in particular were an absolutely peak decade of activity for this phenomenon. mind-blowingly peak activity. I mean, and this is all pre-internet, keep in mind. And still, the largest number of cases that I have been able to collect are from the 1970s. And actually, there was a peak that really went from the late 60s up until the early 80s, but really all of the 1970s. And not only that, so there's a quantity that was really quite shocking to me, but also behavioral changes. So one thing that happened, really it started at the end of the 60s, but by the 70s it was in full swing, and that was a shift of the phenomenon toward predominantly nighttime operations. So prior to the late 60s, of all the cases that I collected, it was almost exactly 50% were in the daytime and 50% were at nighttime. After that, during the 70s, it was 75% were at night. And that goes to almost 90% if you look at military encounters. Military encounters were nearly 90% at night after the late 60s, which is astonishing. So like, I look at that and I think, okay, is my data sample large enough? Well, I can't really know for sure. It's large enough that I thought, 700 cases is not completely trivial. And yet this pattern emerged. And I'm thinking, why did that emerge? Why did this go to night? I really wonder if that's the case with aerial cases as well. And I may want to go back and try to review that. There's so many more aerial cases to look into. But nevertheless, I think that something shifted by the early 70s to nighttime operation. Another thing that shifted or increased was cases of electromagnetic interference by these craft, whether of military or civilian boats or craft, really to an extreme degree. So that a typical situation would be where an object approaches a vessel. Could be American, could be Soviet, didn't matter. It gets close enough and then all the systems go offline. Sometimes, in some cases, one Soviet case I can think of, the engine, this is of a large warship, the engine died. The engine of the ship died while the object was nearby. Frequently, communications go down. Frequently, weapon systems go offline. So this phenomenon seemed to know exactly what it was doing. Sometimes, when you look at cases of electromagnetic interference, we tend to think of it as a kind of residual effect of the craft, not necessarily intentional. But in my study of this, I think that it's very, very much intentional. That the EM is a tool, perhaps you could even say a weapon, but definitely a tool used by them to disable us while they were engaged in observing us in the way that they wished. So they approach, they shut down our systems, and then when they're done, they're done. They just take off and they're gone. This happened so many times. I really think there's a lot of strong patterns. One of the strongest patterns in the book is this repeated interaction between USOs and military assets. This book is not all military. Most of the cases are still civilian, but aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, strategic naval facilities, like these appear again and again and again. Not just American, but Soviet, primarily those two. To me, the pattern suggests much more than accidental encounters. Like these objects seem very interested in the very systems that represented the most advanced military capabilities of that era, especially nuclear-powered platforms and things like that. So I think there's a lot of reason to believe when you look at the behavior of these USOs that they are engaged in a very careful observation of human technological capabilities. That is what it really looks to me. The strongest patterns are definitely behavioral in this. It's like observe, monitor, approach. Like it feels to me like they're testing reactions, occasionally interfering, and then they just leave. I didn't find a lot of evidence of overt hostility, but I didn't find any evidence, or hardly any, of friendly communication either. So instead, really, the behavior to me resembles, if I had to characterize it, a long-term surveillance and reconnaissance program. Like whatever they are, they don't seem to be interested in introducing themselves to us, but they do seem interested in studying us. So yeah, that's that. And aside from some of the just astonishing cases that blew my mind, those are really the key things that I think I would have to say out of this new book of mine.
In a minute, I'm going to ask you just to give us a taste of one case. But just before that, something that struck me, and I think we spoke about this in the original interview for the previous book, was the changing technologies. And the 60s through the 70s into the 80s probably saw as big a jump in maritime technology as maybe any other decade. As somebody who's a complete layman, I'm just looking at the Cold War era, submarines from the United States, Soviet Russia, and others just grow generationally almost overnight, with nuclear-powered submarines, with the missiles on board becoming more advanced. GPS comes into play, stealth technologies come into play. So all these different warships, and again, not the civilian side, but the military side, the water suddenly becomes a much more active place, a noisier place, with all these signals and frequencies jumping about. Do you think that played a big part in the behavioural change of the phenomenon at the time?
I do. Yes, I do. I think you asked it very, very well. That's a really good way to put it. Like if you think of where human civilization was in the year 1900, so 126 years ago, that was the year that we had the first operational submarine ever. So we go from there. First time we're going into the water, and of course, by today's standards, not a very effective submarine, but it was the first. And then shortly after that, we start developing sonar around the time of World War I, and then radio for above water communication. And then World War II, you start seeing large battleships and aircraft carriers for the first time. And then in the 50s, nuclear submarines that could stay under the water for months and months at a time. So our capabilities just radically changed in just 50 years. 50 years. So if you're them, you had to be thinking at the beginning of this period, we have full run of the waters. What can they do? They hardly have the ability to go under the water. And suddenly now they do, these humans. So it would have to cause an adaptive aspect to behavior if there is an intelligence that was down there all this time, which I think there was. So they've had to adapt. And I think they have to continue to adapt. Because now, I mean, I think the shift to nighttime operations, for example, one researcher pointed out to me, he said, well, yeah, it was in the late 1960s that I think it was the Keyhole satellite developed a very advanced optical capability, particularly during daytime, like of exceptional resolution and practicality, but not so much at night. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know if that is the answer, but that could be an answer. Or that could be one answer as to why the phenomenon seemed to go to nighttime operations a little more often. I'm just guessing here, but I think the adaptive behavior of the non-human intelligences behind this has to be something we need to pay attention to. We're not the only society that's changing. They have to, if they are going to be here without us interrupting them, it's very likely they've had to make changes in their behavior as well. And I think it's possible to see those changes if we look carefully.
And is there any particular case through the research, through the time doing it, that either had a bit of a holy shit moment for you, or totally blew your mind, or you just did not expect to see in what you were working on?
Yeah, several. Several. One was a case that was kind of fun to research. In my first volume, I had several cases dealing with the U.S. aircraft carrier, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Had a very active history. It was retired, I think, in the late 70s. And in the 1950s, it had a bunch of UFO and USO encounters. Well, I got one from the FDR from 1975, not long before it was decommissioned. And it was a strange case. I first caught a reference to it in an old MUFON magazine, MUFON journal, MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And it was just a passing reference to this alleged case that happened with this aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean in 1975. And I tried to find the source of it. I found that the source of the case was an outdated magazine, which I got. I'm going to show you. I have not put this one away. So look how old this is. This is like classic tabloid 1970s. This is a 1977 or 78 magazine. I think they only had like 3 or 4 issues. Ideals UFO magazine, issue number 2. So like, so I had to pay like $40 for this thing to get it in the mail. And I'm like, I hope this doesn't totally suck. Well, I read the article, and the article did not suck. In fact, the article, let me see if I can find it here, was exceedingly well written. And oh crap, man, I'll find it here. Here it is, USOs. So look how just goofy this looks, right? It's classic. You could see this in magazine racks of stores, the cheesy UFO magazines. But this is actually exceedingly well written by an F.B. Newman. So I looked up F.B. Newman, and I'm like, there's no one by that name. There's no UFO researcher who ever did anything else under that name. And in fact, I couldn't find any other F.B. Newman at all in the 20th century, other than one guy who did some medical research. And so this clearly wasn't him. But I searched a little further, and I discovered that F.B. Newman was the pseudonym used by a man who was a U.S. diplomat and a military historian. And I know that this was the guy. And I just want to, I'm going to find this in my book here. Here we go. Robert Dorr. So he has his own Wikipedia page. He wrote like 70 books on military aviation. He was an expert. And as a child, as a teenager, he used the pseudonym F.B. Newman when he had, as a kid, he had written to Boeing and a bunch of other aircraft companies asking for pictures of their most advanced aircraft. The FBI investigated him because they thought he might have been a spy. He just was a smart, geeky teenager who was into aviation. But they discovered that he used F.B. Newman as a pseudonym because some letters with that name came out of his house. And I thought, oh, well, so Robert Dorr, in this article that I was just showing you, it's all based out of Washington, D.C. information. Like he's talking to this guy in D.C. and that guy in D.C. Well, Robert Dorr lived his entire life in the Washington, D.C. area. And he would have been perfectly positioned as a diplomat to have connections who could have given him a story that happened on the FDR in 1975. So he writes this out. And what he wrote was the ship. And by the way, he accurately placed its position in May of 1975. Like that would not have been easy to do for a writer in the 1970s to know exactly where this aircraft carrier would likely have been. That type of information wasn't readily available, but it was to him. So anyway, what I think happened is that one of his contacts told him about what happened, and that this craft emerged from the water, circled around this aircraft carrier a couple of times, and then went back into the water again. And that was the sighting. I think it is definitely a true sighting. And even though it was written under a pseudonym, even though none of this can be confirmed, there's no government released documentation on it, I firmly believe it happened. And I think I figured out like who the author of that was. So that was a pretty cool case. But one that was, I mean, there's a lot of cases that are almost disturbing. It was a Soviet case. I'm trying to think from I think 1970, Lake Kronotskoye in Kamchatka. So that's in the Soviet Far East, their Pacific region there. And but it was on the peninsula. It was in a large lake, very large lake. So it was inland. This was a scientific expedition working on this lake. I think that is the largest lake on Kamchatka, which is a very large peninsula. And they saw this very large, unusual gray oval object simply emerge from the lake. Witnesses there reported that their boat engine ceased functioning as the object appeared. Yeah, no surprise. It rose silently above the water, hovered for a little while, and then just accelerated away. After it departed, the engine, came back online. It was a very isolated area. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was this one, but it might have been a different Soviet case, where in the aftermath of that, some people died very, very oddly within a year or so after the event. I think that might have been that case. But that was a very interesting case. There was another one, one that I've actually discussed a number of times, but I think it's still worth repeating. Took aboard another aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy, in 1971. And we have this one, we've got the name of the primary witness, and we have the exact date, July 2nd, 1971. I think the position of that ship was just north of Puerto Rico when you had a little after 8 in the evening, so it was still a little bit light. The ship goes to general quarters or battle stations. And according to the primary witness, he saw this himself. It was an orange glowing sphere that was seen just hovering above the ship, causing people really to freak out. A lot of the sailors were, screaming. One screamed into an intercom, "It's God, it's the end of the world." This was a very, very significant thing. The communications of the ship, the main witness was a comms specialist. So he said, just before I saw this object and just before the ship went into general quarters, all the communications coming in were just gibberish. So the communications were totally shut down. And they were shut down for about 30 minutes while this was going on. He only got to see the object for about a minute. And then that's when general quarters battle stations was announced, and he had to go back to his communications station. So he didn't see how this object departed, but he learned that the weapon systems failed to function as well. So clearly they were trying to scramble aircraft. The aircraft would not start. And this went on for about 25 to 30 minutes. You just imagine you're on a U.S. aircraft carrier. This is the American empire's power projection right there. Those and nuclear submarines are what it's all about. And this big ship was out of communication for 30 minutes while this object just hovered over it, shutting off the weapon systems as well. I have to think, how would that not go to the president of the United States, who at the time was Richard Nixon? And I have no doubt in my mind that President Richard Nixon would have been briefed on this. But it's just another drop in the bucket, just throw it in the pile, just another USO case. Now, this one, I don't know if this object emerged from the water or went into the water, but I had to include it. It was just, you're out at sea, this thing is low over the water, and it's directly over a U.S. aircraft carrier. That has to go into the study. So I definitely included that one. But there were others. I could toss out a couple of others that are not military. There's one, everyone or a lot of people in this field are familiar with the Pascagoula, Mississippi encounter of 1973. It was an abduction case. It was Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. They've both since passed away. They were fishing and they became aware of a strange craft nearby, and humanoid beings took them. But that's not the case I'm talking about. 1 week later, in the exact same region, the United States Coast Guard was called to investigate an underwater USO case that many people had seen. It was this object that was somewhat small, but it was maneuvering in this very bizarre way under the water. Guys are out there with their fishing boats, and they hit it with their oar, and it was a metallic sound. The Coast Guard came out, and they confirmed this as well. The two Coast Guard personnel were out there to respond to this. They went out there. They encountered the exact same thing. They wrote this up in a report. It was a very bizarre USO that did not behave. I mean, there were such things as what are known as midget submarines, and it would not be impossible that this could be the size of such a craft, but to see how this thing maneuvered, or at least by their own account, a submarine cannot maneuver. This thing was rapidly moving and then basically stopping, and then maneuvering in ways and turning in ways in the water that a submarine just cannot do at all. According to what they said, this is what happened. So that was a very bizarre case. There's, let's see. I'm trying to think of any others that are. There's the Colares, Brazil wave of events in the late 70s.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's in this book here. And Colares is a place. This is where the Amazon River empties out into the Atlantic Ocean. So now, when I say the place, the Amazon River empties out over a vast coastal area in South America. It's not just one area. It's a massive amount of fresh water emptying out into the Atlantic all the time and carrying with it all kinds of silt and biological material, making that region of the world really biologically unique on many levels and very important ecologically. But anyway, in that region, in the late 1970s, a number of residents of one of the towns there, known as Colares, reported objects in the water, maneuvering in the water, emerging from the water, entering the water, sometimes hovering above in the air, below them, not in the water at all. There's all kinds of UFO and USO activity being reported there. I mean, to the point where locals were really talking about this a lot and encountering this phenomenon a lot, and to the point where this phenomenon behaved in a way that you really could say was quite aggressive, and you could even say violent toward the local people, to the point where people would be hit with beams of light from the aerial objects. Sometimes while they were inside their homes, a light would penetrate through the ceiling or through the walls and harm them. There was at least one reported death from this and many, many injuries. A local doctor treated many of these people. She is a well-known individual. And then the Brazilian military got involved, the Brazilian Air Force. In fact, they named it, I think, Operation Saucer, it translated into English. The leader of that was Urangi Holanda, I believe, and he, along with his men, he had his company of 100 men were involved in doing this investigation for an extended period of time. They had their own encounters. And in fact, encounters that actually deeply, deeply affected them. Holanda himself never really recovered and sadly died by suicide many years later. And I think it had something to do perhaps with his involvement in this. I think somehow this disturbed him.
With Colares, even when the beams, because it was Operation Plateau, which is Operation Plate or Saucer, which was the translation. Yeah. I wrote about it in my book. I'll give a quick plug, Richard Atlas, which you obviously
I like
kind to blurb for me. Thanks.
Yeah, I really like your book. Yeah.
It's and even like the beams that were going through the homes, people reported seeing the iron in their blood coming out in the beams.
Yeah.
And there were widespread reports of anemia afterwards, with the blood being the iron being removed from people's blood, which was really, really odd. But I like those little details in those types of stories too.
It's a fascinating series of events, and it's a bit of I don't want to say it's a complete outlier, but it is a little bit of an outlier among the long history of UFO encounters. You know, you don't really get a lot of extended reports of people essentially feeling like they're being attacked physically by these objects, but you really do get it here in Colares, and it's well supported by testimony. The English-speaking world likes to ignore places like Brazil and think, oh well, you know, that's not important. It's very important, and those people were every bit as sophisticated as anyone else in the world at the time, and they were quite adamant about what was going on. And there were a lot of outsiders that went in to do investigations. Bob Pratt, Jacques Vallée, and most recently James Fox, you know, went back down to Colares to do a very, very fine film treatment of it. he really did an excellent treatment of that whole thing. And
yeah, James does a lot of work in Brazil and Virginia and
actually, yeah,
Colares.
Virginia, not really. He peripherally Colares. I'm getting it wrong. He did Virginia, which was much needed.
Yeah, he's there a lot though. But listen, and shout out to Alan Levine who illustrated the book. We've got History of USOs, Unidentified Submerged Objects, Volume 2, 1970 to 1989. Richard, you've been great with your time. And just before you head off, and I let you do whatever it is you do with your days when you're not on these types of shows, is Amazon the best place for folks to pick up a copy?
Yeah, absolutely. I sell it on, the book is available as an expensive hardcover, a slightly less expensive paperback, a very affordable ebook, and a very affordable audiobook. So the hardcover is a bit pricey, mainly because I wanted those illustrations, those outstanding illustrations by Alan Levine, to really look their best. It deserves it, and so it's a little more pricey, but I really think it's a book that will stand the test of time. The paperback is, I think, $39 US. It's because of the color printing as well. Yeah. The ebook is cheap. The audiobook is pretty cheap, and that's Amazon's definitely the best place to get them.
Awesome. Richard, wonderful speaking with you as always. I only touched the surface in terms of questions. So hopefully, again, you've been really good this year, jumping on the podcast a couple of times. It'd be great to have you back on before the year's out to go over whatever it is that's happening in this topic, which is only getting more stranger and frustrating and odd and everything else by the day.
Well, personally, I enjoy coming on here with you, Andy. I enjoy our conversations, and I really like your approach to this phenomenon very much as well. So I think we always have good conversations.
I appreciate it. Richard, wonderful talking with you, and we'll speak again soon.
My pleasure. My best to everyone watching your channel.